is my pleasure to introduce Greg Langer. Greg he's relatively new to the Freethought movement, but he has been doing humanist work for his entire, or at least a huge portion of his adult career. He is a lawyer by trade and also a developer, but he has spent the last 2 decades and change, I understand, working to create affordable housing in the Los Angeles area. And a lot of that work has involved being in very close contact and cooperation with communities of faith. And so he's had a lot of interaction on those levels. And he's also been involved in, he also founded an organization called Chrysalis, which works in the Los Angeles area to get homeless people into more self-sustaining situations. And since he started it, over 10,000 people have gone through the program and have gone from not being able to manage their lives well enough to keep a roof over their heads to being able to do so. But he's really interested in talking about how we can gain acceptance and relate to these communities of faith that he has so much familiarity with. So please join me in welcoming Greg Langer.
Thanks, Og. Let me just make one statement. I am not the founder of Chrysalis.
Okay.
I am the founding chairman of Chrysalis. The founder of Chrysalis is a gentleman named John Dillon, who was 22 years old at the time. I was 28. We had nothing. And now it's an $8 million a year organization 25 years later. The point of telling you that is, it was just 2 guys. And we brought in a whole bunch of people, and a lot of change occurred. So change can come from a very small group. But I'm not here to talk about Chrysalis. I'm here to talk about gaining acceptance. And I am a very unlikely candidate to give this presentation. I am argumentative, and I am adversarial by nature. But I don't think that's something to brag about. I've been studying and arguing about religion for over 30 years. At Georgetown University and everywhere else I've engaged. Often with some success, but oftentimes with disastrous results. And nothing like failure to teach us some valuable lessons on how best to present non-theistic beliefs in a manner that will gain general societal acceptance. And that's what I want to talk with you about. The mistakes made and the lessons learned, all of which I hope will help you do a really good job at promoting general societal acceptance for those who do not believe in a God or gods. This has always been my view of religion since I was a little kid. I just couldn't get it. Many of you, I expect, are familiar with the ARIS study. In addition to the information on this chart, the survey highlighted our challenge. 70% of Americans believe in a personal God. But it also highlights our opportunity. 24% of Americans failed to indicate a religious identity in 2008, and 15% claimed no religion. And as you can see on the right, our little group down here, the nuns grew from 8.2% to 14-point-something% to 15%. But look at the difference in the growth from 2001 to 2008. Whether there's a particular significance to the year 2001 and the political events that were going on at that time, I don't know. But the pace of the nuns' growth has slowed substantially, and we need to pick up that pace. A theologian in South Carolina highlighted these changes, recalling an unusual question asked by a teenager. What is that guy doing hanging up there on the plus sign? I was so stunned when I read that. It's like, could somebody have actually thought that? Have we gotten that far away? So when discussing non-theism, as in all discussions, we must offer a two-way street. We need to dialogue, not lecture. We need to listen, hear, and be heard. as we know it is critical to treat each person as an individual and not as a representative of a particular group. Even if that is not how we, as atheists, are treated. We know that many people view atheists negatively, and for many, this is what they see. Atheism has its own baggage, even for those who do not believe in a deity. When I told my older brother about becoming involved in this movement, in the atheist movement, he said, "Atheists? Why would you want to do that?" I said, "Gary, you're an atheist." He said, "Well, I guess I am, but I just don't like that word." Sadly, atheism is a badly tarnished brand. Woody and I can have many discussions about that issue. Now, I don't think we can change that quickly. I think theists and even people who are spiritual are often repelled by the word because they view atheists as dogmatic in their own certainty, while demeaning the certainty of others, threatening of people's civil rights, citing atheism in communist countries, and generally negative and hostile to those who disagree with them. Non-theism, while not as seen as harshly as atheism, is not readily understood, and while it's not as troublesome as atheism, the word defines what one is not rather than what one is. I strongly prefer the term humanist or secular humanist. It's positive, and I believe it strikes a chord with those whose general perspective on life and nature is spiritual. I expect they will respond positively to the term humanist, and certainly much more than they would to atheism or non-theism. It's just my opinion. I think it just works well with, and it also works well with theists because it's not easily rejected, because it implies and requires that one embraces values and ethics that are familiar to theists and spiritualists alike, or spirituals, I should say, alike. Also, it begs people to ask the question, what is a humanist? And it gives them a positive word for non-theistic, non-supernatural view of the universe. I'm not going to talk anymore about humanism. It's beyond the scope of this talk. But one other thing I want to add is that in my experience, claiming that atheists are victims of societal discrimination does not engender a positive response from theists or people who view themselves as spiritual. There's another approach that I know does not work. I've tried it. Didn't help. Tried it again. Didn't help. The bigger challenge is that some people hear you calling them a moron, even if you aren't. But if you are thinking it, odds are they are sensing it. Clearly, we are talking about a very sensitive subject, a subject that many people rarely give any deep thought to. They merely believe what they believe and haven't seen a reason to change. It works for them. Which leads us to a critical question. What is God? Clearly, two very different concepts of God that I have discerned out there. We have the traditional answer. The God of the ancient text. By the way, I'm using the term ancient text in a factual context, not as any kind of put-down or derisive term. That's just what they are. They're ancient texts. And I am also referring more to the main religions than I am to the more current religions like Mormonism or Scientology. I found that with most theists, it's best to refer to their particular text because they may take offense if you use that phrase. So, this is the God of the Jews, Christians, and Islam, but apparently it's not the same God as most of these groups will tell you. Then there's another type of God. God is karmic spirit. I use the word spirituals. Their God is that karmic Zen-like connectivity that I think most of us feels connects us with humanity and nature. Most people seem to experience that feeling. At least everyone I ask says, yeah, I feel that. Maybe it's an evolutionary adaptation. I don't know. But I'm sorry, I got a little distracted. But one thing's for certain, and this is, I just think, a very, very big distinction to make, is that people who are of a spiritual nature do not believe in a deity. People who believe in the ancient text believe in deities. So I think there are two different ways of engaging with those groups. Engaging with theists. Can everybody read that?
Yeah.
Okay. I've experienced this many times, no matter how soft my tone or approach. My recommendation: anticipate it and address it. It's there. I also encourage you to ask yourself, am I being prejudicial by assuming that an individual theist has certain negative beliefs and characteristics? Am I hearing them? I believe that to achieve our goal of acceptance, we must really hear them and empathize with them. Only after achieving this ourselves will we be in a position where we can effectively ask theists to hear us and accept us. Understanding and empathy. I should probably add that I am married to a clinical psychologist, and she had some impact on this presentation. Our goal is gaining general societal acceptance. While converting someone into a non-theist would be nice, I don't think that's a particularly good approach. Trying to convince someone to renounce their belief in a personal deity that answers their prayers, protects them from evil, and can grant them everlasting life is like asking them to stop breathing oxygen. They simply can't conceive of living without it. And again, I'm not saying that in a condescending way. That's just how they feel. Not only is it inconceivable, for many theists, it's downright frightening. So many aspects of their lives would change radically if they changed their religious beliefs. I believe it creates an unconscious, palpable fear. I've seen it in people's faces. The world would not make any sense to them without their religious paradigm in place. And in most instances, even talking about, let alone challenging a person's religious beliefs, whether on theological or historical grounds, is likely to be considered a threat, not only to their religious beliefs, but also to their cultural and historical roots, along with their entire world of social relationships and family. That would be threatening to anybody. Religious beliefs are so deeply entwined and interconnected with the theist's life that they have an understandable fear of becoming untethered from their world. We must understand and empathize with this. We must be sympathetic to the notion that if a person changes their religious beliefs, it is likely that they will have to leave the security of their oftentimes insulated world that is reinforced by a regular routine of family, community, and religious holiday events. It is destabilizing. Don't underestimate this fear, and don't look for or demand rational thought if you want them to engage with you. For non-theists, any disdain toward theists must be replaced by empathy, which is what we are asking of theists with regard to us and our beliefs. Essentially, I believe it's best to make religious views almost irrelevant to the conversation. As I'll discuss later, I believe the best way to do that is by focusing on our shared American identity and our common values. If we focus and tell them that we share with them the same American beliefs and values, and tell them sincerely that it is not our intent to threaten their right to live in accordance with those beliefs. I think we need to tell them flat out, right at the beginning, that you're not trying to convince them that your beliefs are better. They're just different, like the beliefs of all other religions. And remind them that American values are supposed to protect your rights just as strongly as their rights and their beliefs. There should be no difference. You may also want to discuss the concept of Christian religious privilege, but again, that's beyond the scope of this talk. And then, without whining, because they hear us whining all the time, ask them in a personal and emotional way for their understanding of what it's like to live in a country with an overwhelmingly dominant religion, like Islam or Hinduism. What it's like to feel, in any respect, that you have been marginalized. To be concerned about sharing your beliefs for fear of retribution or other negative consequences. Explain to them how un-American it is to have people think negatively of you simply because you don't believe in their particular deity, especially when there are so many to choose from. Focus the conversation on feelings and shared values rather than your different beliefs, and I think you'll gain their attention. Explore the feelings of being upset and disheartened as a non-theist. Related story. I found it effective to ask this very basic question. Aren't all Americans entitled to their beliefs just as you are entitled to yours? It's a basic question, but not a lot of people think that through. And partly, I think, is what Rebecca talked about last night. We must emphasize that most people want the same protections. Choose one's own belief without fear of persecution. Keep government from promoting one religion over another, like in Iran or India. Also, let them know that although they believe in their gods, others may classify them as an atheist. For those who have read Richard Dawkins, this is very familiar. And it's also very effective with theists. I've asked, do you believe that Muhammad was sent by your God to spread the message of Islam, and then, as with Jesus, your God elevated Muhammad to heaven upon his death? Do you believe in the divinity of the Hindu gods of the Veda? No? Doesn't that mean Muslims, Hindus, Christians, and Jews believe in different gods and not in each other's? If you don't believe in their gods, wouldn't that make you an atheist to them? I've found that this lets people understand your thought process and causes them to recognize that they come to the same conclusions as you do regarding everybody else's god or gods, but that you just go one step further and conclude the same for their God. It shifts their focus, and it engenders empathy and understanding, and ironically, a common perspective. Let's turn to the spirituals. When I ask people who are spiritual what they believe, and if they are religious, I start with are you religious? And the answer is almost always no. Yet when I say, oh, so you don't believe in God? No, I believe in God. Well, do you believe there is a divine, supernatural deity who sits on a throne in heaven with angels and things like that, controlling people's lives, responding to people's personal prayers, and deciding who goes to heaven or hell? The answer is always no. I believe there are many people who self-identify as spirituals rather than atheists because of the stigma attached to atheism. This group is most likely to accept non-theists and humanists because oftentimes spirituals share a similar worldview, which includes the rejection of a personal, all-knowing deity and supernatural events. Talking with spirituals, I believe, is the most effective use of our time. They're closer to our beliefs than they usually realize. But there is one thing that most American theists, spirituals, and non-theists share. We share fundamental American values. And these values create common ground that is centered on individual freedom for everyone, no matter their belief. These common values go above and beyond religious beliefs. I found that it is effective to ask, of course, if these constitutional rights are denied to non-theists, what guarantee is there that your particular religious group won't also lose these rights? In addition, there are positive words to use that emphasize the concepts we promote and encourage recognition of our common American values. As we know, the choice of words is extremely important. We've learned that from the Republican strategist, Mr. Luntz, who has been beating us up for about 20 years with the way he usurps words and defines them to suit his needs. But these words, these are good words. People respond positively to these words. Now, science, reason, and logic, well, there are some theists who respond negatively to those words because they think you're telling them that they are non-scientific, unreasonable, and illogical. Also, it seems that most theists do believe in these concepts and think that their religion does also. So, it presents a challenge to them. It pauses them. It makes them think. The word humanist, I don't know. The jury's still out on this vis-a-vis the general public. And atheists. Curious as to what you think. So now, I get to my favorite slide. The millennials. You guys are freaking awesome. My generation helped get us here. But we were a little too angry, too alienated, and frankly, too enthralled with personal liberation through sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But that was then. This is a different time. Generally speaking, your generation is much, much more evolved, worldly, and sophisticated. Really, an incredible group of people. I think the best generation that's ever lived on this planet. So, we brought you this far. Now all we need you to do is fix everything that we didn't. And there is more encouraging news that you will change the world. Here it is. Evolution at work. According to a survey conducted by the leading U.S. dating service, OkCupid, if someone mentioned God in a first approach contact, their chance of getting a response dropped significantly by 30%. By contrast, messages that included the word atheist achieved reply rates of around 42%, significantly higher than the average response rate of 32%. I got very excited when I saw that. So, here we are. Historic time, historic opportunity. Please, I urge you, seize the momentum. Don't blow it. It's only that the fate of the world is in your hands.
No pressure.
Prepare yourself. Change the world. Thank you. Yes?
I found your presentation, your message very refreshing. Thank you for that. I think that there may be a difference between benign religious beliefs and malignant religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that's an important distinction to keep in mind when you're working with or engaging religious people?
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many variations. I've been talking with some people here that I've been having about a 7-month now dialogue with a born-again evangelical Christian. who not only believes that he is right, but that Catholics are not Christians. There is such a broad range, and that's why I think it's so important to really ask the individual what they think. We are all prejudiced. We all bring what we have to the table. And I know that I'm as guilty of this as anyone. And so I've learned to ask more questions and talk less. Yes, John?
So I like your suggestion about using humanist because it's a less touchstone word than atheist. But I worry about that because at the Divinity School, anytime Jerry Falwell or Pat Robertson talked in the 1980s and 90s, they kept talking about this grand secular humanist conspiracy. And they talk like we have the power to, at any moment, depose the government of Washington, establish our own. And so it strikes me that there's a great fear of secular humanists.
Yes.
So then would you go farther and say that we should embrace the term humanist and obviously we're secular as a result?
I personally like the term humanist. And one of the things I like about it is people can be a secular humanist, a Christian humanist, a Jewish humanist, but we're all humanists. Yes?
I have a tendency when people ask me what I believe in, I tend to say that I'm an agnostic, atheistic, secular humanist.
There you go.
Because not only does that, one thing that also does is it helps get rid of the presupposition that you can't be both an agnostic and an atheist as well. And I actually have a tendency, when I would only introduce myself as a secular humanist, or when I would answer that when people ask, the response that I got was people didn't know what that meant. They asked me, so what do you mean by secular humanist or anything like that? So maybe that's just...
I think that's terrific.
That's the advantage.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me what I am. I tell them I'm a secular Christian Jew. It prompts conversation. Yes,
I'm curious if you're familiar with Steven Pinker's concept of the euphemism treadmill. That so words like moron and imbecile started off as technical terms without normative
exactly.
judgment, and now those words have this horrible connotation. So we moved on to retarded, and now that's not okay either. And I guess I feel like it won't be long until humanist and right or whatever get shoved into the pejorative category along with atheist. And
yeah, except
I'm interested in reclaiming atheist, sort of like the gay community is reclaiming queer. So not that I don't hear what you're saying, but
and I hear what you're saying. I really do. I struggle with this. I mean, Woody and I debate it. Everybody. I mean, what do? We all debate this. What should we call ourselves? That's why I like humanists. Yes.
So you were speaking against the idea of trying to persuade people out of religious beliefs because it's traumatic. And yet, I mean, I'm speaking for myself and possibly other people here, and I was persuaded out of my religious beliefs by non-believers, and it was certainly traumatic at the time, but I'm now extremely happy that it happened, and I've been told by a number of people who read my blog that they were persuaded out of their beliefs by things that I wrote, by specific arguments I made against religion. And so I'm wondering, do you think that the atheist, humanist, secularist, etc. movement can have multiple goals? Can we have the goal of achieving more acceptance and more recognition and more understanding of us, and at the same time also have the goal of trying to persuade people out of religion, which we think is a mistaken belief about the world?
Exactly. This is step one. Seriously, it's step one. It gets them to a point where they can actually communicate with you because you're not that devil, in that cartoon. And after you talk a little bit, the horns go away, and you look like a normal person to them. Yes.
I think in your comment you actually made the distinction there. I remember when I was a Christian, and I would talk to secular folks. It didn't matter how much they tried to persuade me. I was totally firm in being a Christian. I had to come to that place on my own. So I think any efforts that we make to try and deconvert people are going to be totally fruitless and alienating. And I think the best way is just to live our lives openly as secular humanists or non-theists or whatever. And through relationships with those people, they'll come to understand our perspective all the better.
And yet, what do you say to people who say, "I was persuaded out of religious beliefs by things that non-believers said"?
Yeah. Right. Well, they read your blog and they came to that conclusion on their own. It's not because you came to them and said, I'm going to try and talk you out of your religious beliefs. And I think that's the distinction. Because they were exposed to it, but it was something that they came to themselves.
Well, we can't force them to, but making an effort and making the views out there seems like an important step.
Yeah, right, and that's why I live my life as like an openly secular humanist individual, but I don't intentionally engage religious people in an attempt to try and deconvert them. I just hope that by talking about my values and talking about my principles, they'll be exposed to them and then
There's a difference between what we do in public discourse, in like blogs and books and magazine articles, etc., and what we do in private one-on-one conversation.
And I would say, because like I was raised like Catholic most of my life, and I kind of always like was a doubter, and I feel like if I had ever been exposed to somebody who was rational and an atheist, that I probably would have been convinced out of my religion pretty quickly.
Yeah. If I could, I'd like to make an analogy to psychotherapy. I mean, a patient may sit with my wife for months and months and months with all of their defensives up and protecting them. And then one day something shifts. This is really addressed to the people who haven't shifted and aren't even interested in shifting. But I find that once you can engage in a dialogue, then you can talk about religion. But you're talking about almost in a historical, social context, and then you can get there. Yes?
Do you feel like, sort of in this vein, that there might be a difference between public communications and private, interpersonal communications, that the word secular humanist is less appropriate for public things? Because, as you say, it starts a dialogue because people don't know what it means, and without the opportunity to have back and forth, saying secular humanist when people don't know what it means is not as useful in public speeches. So do you prefer another term when making, say, a speech or writing a blog post, writing an article, or do you feel that secular humanist is still the most appropriate phrase?
I think it's the most appropriate, because I think that none of the words, unless you're just a person who does not want any secularism at all in your life, and that's just not the way it is in this country, even though some people may believe otherwise. The fact is that we are secular humanists, or some of us identify as that, and we're at the beginning. I mean, I think it's almost like you have a choice. You can either, if there was ever a way of getting an agreement, which there is not, but if you want to reclaim atheism and take it from that statistic that we saw yesterday, and they're the last people I'd ever vote for, and have that battle, or we've got time. We're not going anywhere. You guys are young. Secular humanism will mean something. And I think we need to say what it is. If you write a blog, then you have a little description of what secular humanism is. Or they can, look it up. Yes, Woody? I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This is a private conversation between the two of us, but I think there's value in sharing it.
I hope Greg agrees.
Yeah, we'll see.
I actually cut you off last night when we talked about this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I stated my position quite succinctly, which is not in agreement on this one point that you're talking.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to hear it, and I wanted to hear other people's reaction to it. And I think that there was an overemphasis in the reaction. My view is that there was an overemphasis in the reaction to the one narrow piece of your talk that talked about nomenclature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at 1:15 on Sunday, the 18th of April, that I believe, because I may not have believed this 5 minutes ago, and I may not 5 minutes from now. I believe that it's almost distracting. It is clearly distracting and almost counterproductive to engage in the discussion of nomenclature. That is not an unusual belief. Herb Silverman has it, for instance, when he talks about the 95% of what those who think in which we agree and fighting about the 5% with which we disagree. And it may be the 1 or 2% which we've expanded. There is a significant value in it standing on its own, I guess, because branding has become something we think about in our society. So I'm not sure I'm right about that. But I am fairly comfortable that your talk was so interesting to me and so well presented
Oh, thank you.
that the shift of that one section of it that focused people on something controversial, including my reaction right now, wastes our time in a way that it should be more freestanding and not distracting from the rest of the stuff, getting millennials out to change the world that we fucked up. But we had fun along the way.
No, we didn't fuck it up. I don't care who hears it. We didn't. I mean, we did amazing things. I mean, look at this room. This room wouldn't exist if we hadn't done what we did. You know? And yeah, we fucked things up.
These last two real quick.
Yes.
But, yeah, now?
Go for it.
Good. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the notion of the marketplace of ideas. I think Oliver Wendell was the guy who really put that notion forth first, wasn't it? But anyways, that's how important it is for our ideas as secular people, secular humanists, atheists, whatever, to sort of flood the marketplace of ideas in at least an equal to where religious has that presence in the marketplace of ideas. Like, how would we go about starting that process, getting there?
Talk to the person sitting next to you on the airplane. Talk to the person sitting at the table next to you. I mean, just engage. It's just about engagement. And I think that if you approach people with the notion of, look, I'm not here to question your religious beliefs, but have you considered this? Because most people just don't even think about it. I mean, we're kind of like obsessed with this stuff. But most people aren't. Yes?
How would you respond to Sam Harris's claim that embracing religious moderates legitimizes the fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists?
I think there is value to that argument. When I read it, it made a lot of sense. But practically speaking, I don't think it works. I mean, we have to realize that there's 76% of Christians in this country. And I have to tell you, I haven't met too many Christians that weren't wonderful people. I mean, they're good people. If they choose to believe that, fine. But, don't impose it on me. Don't make my kids, learn about creationism and all sorts of other things that I find, absurd. But you can believe it. Yes?
Just now you said, when you were answering one of these different stuff, you said something about engage the person on the airplane or what airplane next to you or whatever. How can you do something like that without seeming like you're trying to proselytize?
Well, the way I do it, is if I'm sitting and just talking generally, and then I'll say, where are you going? Well, I'm going to Boston. Oh, why are you going to Boston? Well, I'm going to talk about gaining acceptance for non-theists. Are you religious? Gently. You're not coming up to them with a flyer and said, believe in God or you're going to hell. You're not saying any of that. You're just engaging in a conversation. You could talk about healthcare. We could talk about President Obama. We could talk about all sorts of things. Religion is religious beliefs is not it doesn't have to be an offensive taboo topic.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.